Can you check? Testing. Testing 1, 2. Testing, testing. Can you check? Perfect. Okay, you can cut it.
Well, welcome everybody. We're so excited that you guys here. Thanks to the media and Oklahomans for joining us this morning. You know, I'm really excited to be here. It's first day of special session. We've got some great. It's a great day for Oklahomans that we're going to be talking about tax cuts and lower government, smaller government. And I've got the Speaker of the House, Charles McCall, with me. Grover Norquist, who you're going to hear from in a second, is from Americans for Tax Reform, and he is a leader, worked in the Reagan administration, been all over the country, and is a tax expert. So I'm really excited, Grover, for you to be here. Thank you so much. And we've got the GOP chairman, Nathan Dahm, who's also a senator here. And so thank you so much for being here, Senator. We've got Senator Jett. Thank you. You snuck in on me. And we've got the treasurer of the great state of Oklahoma, Todd Russ, with us that we'll address in a second. But I called this special session for three things. Number one is budget transparency. Let's make sure the budget is more transparent. We have more time to look at it. We have more time for House and Senate members to opine on that. And I've just asked for 72 hours to look over the budget. I've asked for tax cuts, and I've asked for tax fairness. And so we're welcome to talk about any of those things today. Getting these things over the finish line are going to be wonderful for all 4 million Oklahomans to slow the growth of government. And I've got a couple of posters here that I wanted to share with you. So there's been some confusion. I think people have been spinning things saying, "Hey, Governor, how are we gonna pay for core services?" Let me be very clear with Oklahomans. I would never advocate to cut revenue below reoccurring expenses. So we have to invest in education and roads and bridges and healthcare. We will absolutely pay for core services. So right here is our reoccurring expenses, $9.8 billion. My question for the legislature and for us to ask ourselves, how big should government be? When we have excess revenue, like we did last year at $1.2 billion, what do we do with that excess? Do we give some of that back to the taxpayer? After all, it's the taxpayer's money. Do we keep raising the expense level? If you keep raising expenses every year, you're going to be in a terrible situation in a few years. So a quarter of a point tax cut is $95 million, according to the Tax Commission, this next year. And then it's $245 million or $240 million the following year. We can absolutely do it when we have these type of surpluses. After all, we have a $5.4 billion savings account. The other thing you could do is you could save this money. Well, eventually Oklahomans are going to say, "Hey, Speaker, Governor, how much money do you need in savings? You already have the record savings account." So it's time to slow the growth of government and give that back to the taxpayers. The next chart I wanted to share with you is just some history. Okay, this one is unbelievable. Okay, back in 2010, I don't know if you guys can see this. Back in 2010, Oklahomans had 3.76 million people. Okay, 3.76 million people, and we were serving those people with a budget of $6.6 billion. Okay, 13 years later, Oklahoma has been growing. Matter of fact, you hear me talk about it a lot. The last couple of years, we've been top 10 in net migration, people moving to our state. But over this 13-year period, we have grown about 8%, okay? 8% population. At the same time, our appropriation budget has gone from $6.6 billion to last year, it was almost $13 billion. So population, we're serving 8% more people in the state of Oklahoma, and yet our budget has gone up right at 100%, okay? This is unsustainable, okay? This is why I refused to sign the budget last year, is we cannot keep spending these types of money. We have to slow the growth of government. I'm going to let Norquist talk a little bit about the different states, but we have some state populations up here that shows kind of our competition and who we compete against. We have to compete from an economy standpoint against all these other states. These states are moving to a zero income tax. They are all moving and lowering their rate. People are fleeing from high tax states to low tax states. We have to compete against Texas every single day. and they have zero income tax. I'll let Grover talk more about that. But the bottom line is, we have already started over the last 20 years on a path to zero. What I mean by that is we have started back in the early 2000s, our actual tax rate was 7%. Now we're at 4.75. This on the bottom is our revenue growth, okay? If you look back in 2001, taxes went up 1/4 of a point and they peaked out at 7%. If you notice, revenue actually went down. And then if you see the revenue, the tax cuts happening, revenue is actually increasing. We believe that when you lower taxes, you're expanding the tax base, the economy is being fueled, more businesses move, more people hire, more jobs are here. We're not losing people to lower tax states. It is great for everyone. And I think this proves the point. We're at 4.75, and look at our revenue growth from where we started at a 7% rate in the early 2000s. So again, big picture here is we want to slow the growth of government. This is unsustainable, and we want to cut taxes, give that money back to the taxpayer. Inflation is hurting every single Oklahomans. We can afford it. I'm not advocating that we would ever cut taxes below reoccurring expenses, or put core services ever in jeopardy. So I just want to be very, very clear on that. And so now it's my honor. I want to introduce and bring up to the platform to give some comments the great Speaker of the House, Charles McCall.
Well, good morning, Governor. Thank you for the invite to be here at your press conference this morning. And as you can see, the House of Representatives is answering your call today, and will be convening. House Majority Caucus will be caucusing here shortly this morning. But ladies and gentlemen, it is no secret that the House of Representatives, I myself and the majority party, the Republicans, are for cutting taxes. Largely due, we think, it's good policy. We have advanced bills for the last 3 sessions, and with this special session, it will be a 4th session, to give money back to the people of the state of Oklahoma. There's certainly some interesting dynamics in the national economy that also affecting families here in the state of Oklahoma with inflation. And we think we need to be responsive to that. But overall, when you have surpluses and a strong performing economy, that is the perfect time to lower taxes on the people of the state of Oklahoma. And if you're not convinced that lowering taxes will be good for the people of the state of Oklahoma, for business, and for the overall economy of the state of Oklahoma, I'd point you back to the last time that we cut taxes, just about 2.5 years ago. We lowered the personal income tax by 0.25%. We have cut the corporate income tax for the state by half. We've eliminated the franchise tax, the marriage penalty, and the tax code more recently. And what we've seen in result of that is increased revenue for the state of Oklahoma. When you leave money in the pockets of the people and the citizens of the state of Oklahoma, they give them the opportunity to decide what to do with that money. It benefits the state of Oklahoma. They will spend the money, and it will come back to the state of Oklahoma, so it can continue to do the things that it's been able to accomplish the last few years. With our economy performing well, with the people of the state performing well and doing well, we're in a position where investment in roads and bridges in the state of Oklahoma are at an all-time high. We're the top 10 states in terms of bridge infrastructure in the state of Oklahoma because of those investments. We've been able to make record investments in education, public safety, healthcare in this state. And we've had the ability to put forth incentives to bring more business to the state of Oklahoma. All of those require a well-performing economy. And the people of the state, the government is just a reflection of the people of the state of Oklahoma and their performance. If they're doing well, the state will do well. But for the House of Representatives, the body closest to the people of the state of Oklahoma, we speak with them all the time. That's who we represent. And we continue to believe in giving back some of the money that they're paying into the state. Ultimately, taxing the production and people's labor discourages output. It discourages more achieving a higher level of output because it limits the amount of wealth and opportunity that the people of our state can achieve. When we look across the country, the states that are performing the best have lower rates of taxation, and those that are really performing well have 0% taxation on personal income. And while we can't do that tomorrow, and I don't believe the governor has called to take the rate to zero, we do agree with the governor on a path to get to zero. Now, I personally would like to see that move as fast as possible. But the state of Oklahoma, without doubt, is capable and able to cut rates and to help the people of the state. We have addressed, it's time once again to come back and leave more money in the people's pockets as they're dealing with inflationary pressures. So, Governor, thank you for your time this morning. I'm going to exit and head to a caucus meeting, but ladies and gentlemen, we are in communication in the House with the governor. We are in communication with the Senate leadership. We're hoping to find common ground to move something to the governor's desk very shortly. But we will, in the House, advance a 0.25% tax cut as the governor has asked and mentioned this morning. We've done it 3-4 other times. We will do it again. But most importantly, I hope that the other legislative chamber will act quickly, and let's get this to the governor's desk, get it signed into law, and move forward. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Governor. Thank you. And at this time, it's my honor to introduce the State Treasurer of Oklahoma and my former colleague in the House of Representatives, Treasurer Todd Russ.
Good information. Thank you for being here this morning. I've been asked to give some data and statistics. As the State Treasurer of Oklahoma, it's my job to manage and invest billions of dollars for the state and anticipate trends in the economy. And with that, I will tell you that not only is it my job to anticipate the good times, but it's part of my job to anticipate the downturns and the really bad times. And we'll share some trends with you on that. Currently, the revenue for the state of Oklahoma is literally an all-time high. But I will tell you, if you look back 25, 30 years ago, in 1996, the state appropriated $3.6 billion to run the state of Oklahoma on as an appropriated dollar. If you look at 2016, that number has gone up on appropriations and gross receipts of about $11 billion. In 2019, it went up to $13 billion. And today we're at $17 billion. Our all-time high was $17.64 billion back in March. Phenomenal numbers. We've seen a downturn in those revenue trends. Over the last 5 months, we've seen those walking back a little bit. Actually, in August, we saw a 60% reduction in GPT revenue. But in spite of that 60% reduction, I will tell you that the 12-month year-to-year revenues still were $400 million above the previous 12-month cycle. So that just gives you some indication of the robust economy that Oklahoma is enjoying and going through right now. If you look at the average 10-year appropriation for the state of Oklahoma, that average is about $8.5 billion. We appropriated over $12 billion this last session. If I look at the worst times in Oklahoma, and that's part of my job to anticipate the tough times, the worst time in the history of Oklahoma for a deficit was about $1.2 billion just a few years ago. We got through that with a 4 to 6% cut in the state budget. $1.2 billion and managed to get through the state budget with about a 4% cut, actually. If you take a worst case scenario and say we double that, say we go off the cliff $2 billion in 1 year, If you take the average of $8.5 billion, that's still 20% above the average appropriation for the last 10 years. That answers my question. Do we have a contingency? What's the worst case scenario and how will we deal with those things? As a previous banker, my job was to make loans as a commercial lender. I had to assess certain things. If I had a good business plan, if I had a cash flow, if I had a safety net, a contingency, if I had all of these things in place, it made a successful loan. If we've got all of these things in place that the state of Oklahoma has, the governor talked about the $5+ billion, the revenue streams, the diverse economy that we have a safety net, we have a contingency plan, we have the cash flow, we have a good scenario, we have a fantastic scenario for giving back a modest tax cut to the taxpayers of the state of Oklahoma. So with those things, I just kind of wanted to give those bits of information. And I also would like to introduce a wonderful guest we have in Oklahoma with us. I think everyone here has probably heard of him, has a great history as a champion for smaller government. Grover Norquist is president of Americans for Tax Reform, a taxpayer advocacy group he founded in 1985 at President Reagan's request. ATR works to limit the size and cost of government and opposes higher taxes. And with that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Grover Norquist.
Governor, thank you. The discussion going on in Oklahoma today is not happening in a vacuum. There are 50 states. A number of decades ago, people started to notice that the 7 states with no income tax, and people have in their handouts this map, which has the green states, the 7 states with no income tax, that people were beginning to move there and leave states like California, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut with higher taxes. In the last 2020 to 2022, the 15 lowest states saw 2.3 million Americans move into it, and the 15 highest states lost 1.2 million. People are moving away from high income tax states and towards low income tax states. But before people leave, the money leaves, the investment leaves. Overseas investment goes to those states with lower taxes, and American investment goes to those states with lower taxes, and the jobs and the people follow. Over the last, there was this time, you may remember, when people said, oh, it's the weather. People are leaving California and moving to Texas because of the weather. Okay, this I think was one of the weaker arguments that has been put forward. Nobody moves to Texas because of the weather. What's actually happening is that people and legislators and governors across the country notice this, and over the last decade, there's been a movement first to a single rate tax at the state level, at the individual personal income tax at the state level, and then on to zero. And as you're looking at these maps here and what you have in your handouts, the 7 green states have no income tax. States that recently moved to a single rate tax include North Carolina and Arizona, and then Georgia and Iowa are in the process of moving to a single rate tax. The advantage that is single rate taxes are very difficult to increase. Illinois has a single rate tax, and it's a very high tax state, but it has single rate. That income tax has not been raised. The governor, a Democrat, spent $50 million trying to convince the people of Illinois they should move away from a single rate tax, and gave all the arguments for a graduated or progressive income tax. And on the day that Biden was elected president with 16% margin, that effort to go away from the single rate tax lost with a 9% margin. So people trust a single rate tax. They understand perfectly well that if everybody in the state pays the same rate, taking it up is more difficult for the politicians because they have to look at everybody at once. And taking it down is certainly easier because you say, here's what, we're going from 5 to 4.5, and people know exactly what that is. Progressive taxes allow you to divide people into different groups and mug them one at a time. Looking around Oklahoma, as you look, the 12 states have a single rate tax, 2 more are moving there. And the states that are phasing down towards zero include states such as Iowa, which only a couple of years ago was at 8.6%. They've taken that down to under 6. They're on the way to 3.99. And in January, February of this year, they're going to take that down further to zero. So they'll put themselves on the route to zero. Our friends in North Carolina for 11 years have been phasing down first to a single rate tax and then on their way to zero. The most recent marker they just put forward is 2.5% to take it down there. Arizona already got to 2.5% and will put on the measure at the ballot, taking it down to zero. How does this happen in other states? You usually move to a single rate tax by taking the top rate down and removing the lower rates so that people don't start paying taxes until later, come to a single rate, and then you take the rates down with a trigger. As revenue comes in and ongoing revenue is available, you take that down and you don't spend all the additional revenue coming in. And we have now a number of examples of states that have been doing that successfully. Our friends in Kentucky and in West Virginia have both passed laws to phase their income tax down to zero over the next 10 to 12 years. Georgia's phasing to a single rate tax, but then looks to go to zero. Mississippi is phasing down to a single rate tax, and they passed a measure in the House, hasn't moved through the Senate yet, but in the House, the numbers are roughly 100 to 9 to phase down to zero. They're starting with getting to 4 and then down from there. Looking at the neighborhood, Oklahoma is next to Arkansas, which just elected a governor on the campaign commitment. We're going to zero. They've had 2 tax cuts so far. The legislature and the governor are committed to phasing their income tax down to zero. Texas personal income tax is already at zero. Colorado, which is deep blue, they have had 2 measures put on the ballot, and these will continue to take it. Was it 5%? It's now down to 4.4%, and they just put it on the ballot. And while the legislature won't vote to take their single rate tax down, the people of Colorado have twice done so, once with the endorsement of the Democrat governor. Nebraska and Iowa are both in competition to get to zero. Iowa, again, started at 8.6%, corporate rate of 12%, and they're taking those down, the individual income taxes en route to zero. But the governor and the House and the Senate are all in agreement. Nebraska saw that happening, and they moved down to 3.9% as well. So those 2 states are competing to get to zero first. Wyoming and South Dakota next to them are already at zero. Missouri's committed to take their rates down as well. They haven't committed to zero, but if you look at the leadership there, they want to take their rates down. And of course, Louisiana has a trigger that takes their rates down, not to zero because it's not tight enough trigger, but if they can nominate a Republican with fewer girlfriends than the last one, they'll be able to move doesn't have to be zero, just single digits. In Louisiana, they'll get the trigger down to zero. Mississippi is already on the way to zero. Tennessee's at zero. Oklahoma's surrounded by states moving their taxes down. Businesses looking to invest don't just ask where are your taxes now. They ask where your tax is going to be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Getting to a single rate tax assures people it won't be going up. Getting to zero ensures them it won't come back. So I'm excited at the progress that Oklahoma has made in tax reduction and its commitment to continue that. And because the red states are all moving towards flat and then zero, in the next 2 decades, there are going to be many, many more states that you can walk into at zero. And the question for Oklahoma is whether they want to be at the tail end of that journey or towards the beginning. And I think Oklahoma is well placed to be at the beginning of that progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Grover. We'll just open it up to a few questions for Treasurer, myself, or Grover. Yes, sir.
Governor, I'm going to start with eliminating the sales tax on groceries that affects the average Joe instead of an income tax cut that benefits disproportionately the rich.
So if I could write these bills, we would already have the grocery tax eliminated. We'd already have a 1/4 point tax cut done. As you know, I called them in for special session last year, talked about grocery tax. My state of the state this past year, we talked about grocery tax. I asked for a 76 basis point reduction, which we could have absolutely afforded. I asked for 76 basis points to get down. The reason it was 76, I wanted to get down to 3.99. But I agree with you. The most common sense regressive tax that we could eliminate is the grocery tax. And well, I basically tax cuts. I don't write the legislation. I'm calling them here. asking them to do it. Last special session, if you remember, we talked about it. They said they wanted to study the tax cuts, and then they were going to do something last year, and nothing's been done. So again, I would love to get the grocery tax done, but there's always do you be specific? Well, then they get mad when you're too specific. So legislature, slow the growth of government. Let's make sure that we do a tax cut for Oklahomans. We can afford it.
Governor, can I
Yes, sir.
just on that? In a number of states, when they phase the income tax down to zero, they include taking down that tax as well. In Mississippi, when they had the vote, overwhelming vote to go to zero, it included a phase down of the sales tax on food as well. But the most dangerous tax for a poor person is the one that kills their job. It's also important to reduce the sales tax on food, but that is often included as part of a phase down to zero.
And I think the speaker kind of mentioned, I don't know if you guys caught that, but it's worth re-mentioning. Guys, when we cut taxes, this money doesn't disappear. It just doesn't get washed through government to set up a perpetual spending base. But the taxpayers still spend their money, and they go buy their kids a new pair of tennis shoes, and they're going to go out to dinner more, and that dollar is going to spend in the economy. So, and then the speaker said it right. It comes back through sales tax. It comes back through businesses doing better and paying tax, et cetera, et cetera. So the money doesn't disappear. We know that. That spurs the economy on. Yes, ma'am.
I don't know all the ins and outs of all of this, so if you could explain, when we talk about all these other issues, it seems like we're always pointing to lack of funding, money being a problem. So can you explain how and why we ended up with all this extra money?
How did we end up with this extra money? I believe there are a bunch of different factors. I believe we've been fiscally disciplined, and that means we've been growing the economy. I've been out busting my tail. I've met with 30 different ambassadors. Commerce has the highest pipeline right now of companies moving to our state. Businesses are expanding. We're investing in education. Oklahoma is becoming the place to be. I think if you look at how we handled COVID versus some other states, we kept everything open. We're top 10 and people moving to Oklahoma. That means businesses moving. We have been diversifying our economy for over a decade. A decade ago, 30% of our revenue was relying on oil and gas. Now that's down to 9 to 10%. And we put the stabilization, so we took out the highs and lows there. So there's no doubt about it. Our economy is growing. That's great. The problem is we keep growing spending at a much higher level than we need to. This is going to come back to bite us if we don't slow that growth of government. And that's what I want to do. I'm just trying to slow the growth of government. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry.
Carmen.
If the legislature came into the special session and cut income taxes quarter of a point and then left and did nothing else, would you be happy with that? Would you be satisfied with that?
I would be ecstatic.
Governor, the Senate seems to be, try to write down the next quote on after that. The Senate seems to be not on board with you on this tax cut mission as last special session showed. They have a hearing here right now at 10 a.m. And 5:35. They've invited you to be there to testify, talk about your plan. Are you going to attend?
I'm here. I'm not going to attend their meeting. I'm here being transparent with the public. I've been very clear for 5 years, just came out of an election cycle. I'm talking about slower government. Let's slow the growth of government. Let's give tax cuts back to the taxpayer. I couldn't be more clear. I have heard the same rumors you have that they don't know what the plan is, and we've heard that stuff. Last special session, the House passed 19 different tax cuts and threw it over to the Senate. So my question for the Senate is, let's just put it up for a vote. Let's put a quarter of a point up for a vote. Let them vote on it. Don't let somebody in leadership keep just a vote from happening. The governor has called us in for tax cuts, and let's let them vote on it. Then they can just, if it fails, it fails. Or if it passes, then the Senate gets to answer to their constituents, or the House does. But I've been very clear. Slow the growth of government.
But I mean, why not go sit with them and answer those questions and convince them face to face versus us?
I have an open door policy. I will go talk to their caucus anytime. I've done that numerous times. I have breakfast during session every single Tuesday with the leadership. I do offsite strategy sessions. I've been very, very clear. This is being streamed all over the state right now. I couldn't be more transparent with what I'm asking for, and it is to slow the growth of government, put money back into people's pockets, and slow this unsustainable growth in government.
You've called several special sessions for tax cuts and other reasons. What makes you think this one will be successful? You won't call more.
You know, I don't know if this one's going to be successful or not, but the governor's job is not to write the laws. Like I said before, if I could have written this law, we would already have the grocery tax eliminated, and we'd already have 76 basis points reduction, and we'd already have a 3 handle on income tax. I would have had the corporate income tax removed by this point, and we would not be spending $13 billion. But the governor calls it, and then the legislature, the lawmakers have to write that bill. You heard the speaker, and he said they're going to put something on. They're going to put something over to the other chamber. Hopefully, it gets to my desk, and we can sign this into law and put more money back into people's pockets.
Governor, I think many of us are painfully aware that in May, the legislature dropped many of their appropriations bills in the 11 o'clock hour at night, and there was JCAB meetings the next morning. I'm curious to know more about what you're asking them with the, I guess you propose a 72-hour rest period for those bills to be read. Philosophically, why do you think this is important, and what have the conversations been with legislative leaders on that?
Yeah, you got to look at history. You have to study what other states are doing and how are they prospering. Florida is a great example. Jeb Bush, my friend that was governor there 20 years ago, has talked to me about what happened to them and how he got budget transparency in his process. And he did the same thing. He said, hey, let's vote on these budgets. Let's have the actual appropriations bill at least 72 hours. If you talk to rank and file House and Senate members, they're as frustrated as the media. They're as frustrated as the governor. When they get a bill on the last day of session that they have to vote on right then, because we sine die on that Friday, so they have to get it and vote on it, they're put in a bad situation. We're just trying to bring transparency. Florida is a great example as well that I love to talk about. Grover told me about this. Talk about population growth. Florida has more people than the state of New York, okay? There are a few more people than the state of New York. Their budget is about $115 billion. New York's budget, with fewer people, is $230 billion. So the question for Oklahomans, how big should government be? Shouldn't it track our population? We're not serving that many more people. Why have we doubled our budget since 2010? Those are real questions. Yes, we should have a growth in government as inflation or CPI index or population growth, but it shouldn't be double when our population has only grown 8%. That's what I'm trying to slow down. As the businessman governor, I want to make Oklahoma top 10. And I'm telling you, the way to make it top 10 and not put us in a bad situation is keep our savings, $5.4 billion. When we took over, remember, I had zero money. A lot of people laughed at me when I set that first vision to get at least $2 billion in savings. Y'all remember that? Back when I first took office, we have 5.4 now. So I'm not going to put Oklahoma in a bad situation, but this is unsustainable. Revenue doesn't just keep going up in a straight line.
Governor, you've noted the high level charts of increased government spending. The past few years, a lot of spending has come from increased education spending, which has been pretty popular across the board. How much of that increase is from the education things we've done for teacher raises, additional funding for that kind of stuff?
Education last year was $625 million. So as a percentage basis, I don't know, but yeah.
That's growing government is not adding more to education.
That's exactly right. And if you'll go back and look at my state of the state and my budget proposal, I asked for I think $300 million increased in education and a 76 basis point tax cut and the elimination of the grocery tax. We were all balanced out, but instead we ended up spending this much money, which I didn't sign. Yes, ma'am.
Do you think that not going to the appropriations committee will potentially delegitimize this special session for the Senate?
I have no idea. There's no delegitimizing the special session. We're here. It is special session. The governor's called it. He's asked for tax cuts to slow the growth of government. Now, I have done my job. Legislature has to do their job. Just put it up for a vote. That's all we're saying. Just put it up for a vote. Why are we letting a couple people not let the Senate vote on something?
Aren't you concerned that really a lot of this increased revenue is the result of sustained oil and gas, high oil and gas production, and also all this COVID relief money, and that when we get back to reality and cut taxes, maybe put the state in a difficult
Yeah, I'm not worried about that at all. And as you notice, what the treasurer said there is and I'd say it a different way, but he was talking about he said 1.2 billion was the biggest appropriation deficit they ever faced. I've gone back in history. The biggest downfall we've ever had was 3.7 billion. And so with a $5.4 billion, we can weather any kind of economic downturn. We're not reliant. We have been diversifying. And every time we've cut taxes, revenues increased. And like you said, we had this high water mark, but rolling 12 months, we're still at record levels. Here's the deal. A quarter of a point is $95 million this next year. Okay. And then it's 240 the next year. It's not a lot of money when we're talking about a $13 billion appropriation level. The other thing and I know we're getting the weeds a little bit, but total state spends, when you talk about the federal dollars, it's closer to 29 billion. Yes, sir.
I'm going to say the name, Greg Tree. Why has he grown in office to the point that he no longer looks like Tom Coburn acolyte in terms of the size of government, the level of taxation?
Listen,
You know, what's your answer?
I'm not here to talk about anybody specifically. We're not throwing shade on anybody. My job as governor is to tell Oklahomans the truth. My job as governor is to slow the growth of government and give a tax cut back to the taxpayer. It's that simple. But I'm not the legislature. There's different forms. I'm the governor. I've done my job. Now it's up to the legislature to do their job or answer to their constituents. And that's all I can tell you. You'll have to ask them about that.
All right, thanks everyone. If you have more questions,
Thank you.
email them to me.